All right, so hello everyone, and welcome to the third meeting of our Inclusion Café Book Club. So my name is Janan Nuri. I'm one of the librarians at the RCN, and I'm also chair of the LGBTQ+ staff network at the RCN. Today we're going to be exploring trans stories and experiences of trans individuals when approaching medical professionals about transitioning. We're going to start off with an interview and Q&A with our guest speakers, Craig Davidson and Rachael Ridley. After that, you'll be put into breakout rooms to discuss the book chapter from Trans Britain by Christine Burns. Don't worry if you haven't read the chapter, you're not going to be tested on it. But this event will give you a chance to have an open discussion. I think it's worth saying before we get started that, LGBTQ+ covers a really broad spectrum, and it's impossible to be an expert on absolutely everything. I think we shouldn't be afraid to admit if we don't know about something. What's important is that we're open to learning more and that we ask open questions in a respectful way. If we do that, we can grow and understand more about different communities. We will be recording the interview part to post on our website later, but we're only recording the interview and not the discussion that follows. So please don't worry about speaking up in that section. Now, you might have noticed that a few of us have put our pronouns in our screen names. It's a simple way of showing support, awareness, and understanding to the gender non-binary, gender fluid, and trans communities. If you wanted to do that, if you're on a laptop or PC, if you hover over your video, you should see 3 dots in the top right-hand corner. And if you click on that, it will give you the option to rename. If you're on a phone device, if you tap on participants at the bottom of the screen, so on participants, then on that page, just find your name and tap on your name on that list. And then it will pop up with your username and the option to change it. It's a real pleasure to have both Craig Davidson and Rachael Ridley with us today, who've both been really active in the RCN, working in committees and also helping us to improve our guidance documents. I'll let them introduce themselves because there's lots to say. So over to you, Craig.
Thank you very much for inviting me today, Janan. So my name is Craig Davidson. Some people from the RCN might know me. I was former chair of RCN students. While I was there, we did a lot of work on the equality and inclusion strategy with Wendy Irwin, and our big student ambassador event the year I was chair was all around that. I now am one of the curators of RCN Newly Qualified Nurses, and I am a steering committee member on the RCN Nurses in Management and Leadership Forum. So my pronouns are he and him, and I identify as a gay man, and I am a newly qualified nurse working in infectious diseases. And I'm delighted to hand over to Rachael Ridley. So if you just want to introduce yourself, Rachael.
My name's Rachael. I'm a staff nurse. I work on the front line in orthopedics and trauma. I've been a staff nurse since 1999. And I've been on the Northern Board. I'm a learning rep. I'm a diversity champion within the RCN. I've been involved as part of a group of people putting together a learning resource for care for trans patients. And in 2012, I think it is, I tabled a Congress resolution which was addressing the postcode lottery, whether you got funding for being trans, and that was in 2012. And I'm still a learning rep, and I'm still working as a frontline staff nurse, except I'm on annual leave at the moment.
Lucky for some, no, we're working on the front line at the moment. I'm sure many of people that are watching and taking part today, we're all very, very busy. There's just a little thing called COVID-19 going on for us all in the front line. So it's great to have you with us, Rachael, and I hope you don't mind, but I'm just going to ask you a few questions if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine, yeah.
Yeah, so just for everyone that's watching today, can you just tell us a little bit about your transition and journey? So when did you first begin your transitioning journey?
Well, my official journey began in 2005, but I actually started a little bit before then. But when I was transitioning, I was going through a very difficult period anyway, because I was very close to my mother, and my mother was basically, she was dying of cancer, and my mother was probably about my closest friend I had, and although she wasn't happy about what was happening to me, she accepted it.
Yeah.
And so, but before then, I told people at work around about 2004, towards the end of 2004, and I can remember the day I'd made a commitment that I was going to tell everybody at work this particular day, but then somebody beat me to it. A consultant had actually outed me. I don't know who. I'm not going to mention any names, but it doesn't work for the trust anymore now.
Good.
But he learned it. He got to know about it from somebody from a conference in London. So my name gets about. But anyway, I was going to tell them that weekend anyway. So but we had to take things very slowly. So I did start to spend time going out with my colleagues at work as Rachael in socially, so they got a chance to get used to Rachael, and they also they had meetings as well, where I wasn't included, you know.
Yeah.
It was very difficult for them because it was in the January of 2005. I finished work, and 2 weeks later I came back as Rachael.
Yeah.
So that's when it started. And then in 2007 I had my surgery at Leicester, and here we are today.
It's interesting that you talk that they had meetings when you weren't there. So do you feel that you, as Rachael, had to accommodate for your colleagues when you were beginning your journey?
I think yes, to a certain extent, yeah, because it was going to be very difficult for them because they've got to know me as that other person, and then all of a sudden, I'd come out and said I was going to start life as Rachael, but they had, warnings. I mean, things that not warnings, but they got to know about it beforehand.
Yeah.
I remember I spoke to one particular staff nurse, and I told her in confidence, but I knew she wouldn't keep it in confidence because that's probably why I told her. And then she told it. I said what was happening to me, and then she told everybody else.
That's the good thing in nursing, though. You know who to tell to get to spread the news quickly.
But she would. I knew she would, and I've got a time for her to say so.
Yeah.
But she doesn't. And again, she's retired now, so.
But then it's so I can only imagine, Rachael, it's so much for you to go through personally, and then for you to come to terms with. How did it affect you, knowing that people were having discussions about it when you perhaps weren't there? If you don't mind talking about that, how did that make you feel?
I felt a bit left out, and I kind of wondered who was on my side. I thought the response was going to be a lot worse than it really was.
Yeah.
I think there was only a couple of people that were not happy about me using the female toilets to changing facilities. So I was asked at that time, if I would use the visitors' toilets. And I was actually asked to go to the doctor's residence to change. But looking back in hindsight now, we had no policies at the time, and it was all very new to the trust how to address this situation. So it was a learning experience for both me and for the trust. And I hope today things would be, well, I know definitely will be different.
Yeah. And then Janan mentioned at the start, so obviously our reading for today was Christine Byrne's excellent book, Trans Britain, Our Journey Through the Shadows. So the chapter we were looking at was from Adrienne Nash, her story about her transitioning. And I don't know about you, but I found her experiences so harrowing when we were reading about it. What do you find were the differences or any similarities, if there were, between Adrienne's journey and yours?
Well, there was a similarity, is that when I first approached my doctor, my GP,
yeah,
I was at a small market town, and when I approached my GP, she hadn't a clue what to do. She hadn't come across it. She didn't know what to do, who to refer me to. And then she consulted with the senior partner within the practice, and he still didn't have any, she, I should maybe, they didn't know how to address this situation. But it was just fortunate that I was actually moving house I was living at my parents' house at this stage. Then I just bought a house in Carlisle, so I had to change GP practices. And the GP practice in Carlisle, they actually were aware of the referral process. But at that time in the Northeast, there was no gender identity clinic. And so my initial referral, I was referred to a general psychiatrist and then I was referred to a gender identity psychiatrist who specialised in that area. And that was away in Edinburgh. And
did you find a big difference speaking to a general psychiatrist to one who specialised in gender identity?
Basically, I was very fearful. Was I going to tick all the right boxes? Would I be identified as being trans? That was my biggest worry. Yeah. Would I just be labelled a transvestite, or somebody who just cross-dresses? Or, but I knew in my heart, and then this psychiatrist just referred me and asked me who I wanted referred to. And I knew of there was a doctor in Edinburgh, a female doctor, gender psychiatrist, and I had heard a lot of good reports about her. So I asked to be referred to see her, and I was.
Excellent.
And in that book, the book we were reading about, is that she had a lot of horror stories and how she met these male gender psychiatrists who had this stereotypical image of how you should present yourself. Now, that was my biggest worry. How do I look? How do I? And when I went to visit this gender psychiatrist at the time in Edinburgh, I phoned her up beforehand and I did ask what appearance, what am I expected to wear, and she basically relayed a lot of my fears when she just said, you wear what you feel comfortable with.
Yeah, and that's a big difference. It was that Stepford wife image that Adrienne was expected to have. I found shocking, and then the human right infringement if she was married, that she had to get divorced.
Well, in one that I never went looking for to get married, and I've stayed single because of that. And that was one of the reasons I stayed single.
Yeah.
Now I've just got used to being on my own. I don't know.
Sometimes that's easier, I think. So for those who don't know, can you talk us through your transition and journey? So how long do you have to live as Rachael?
2 years. I think it was 2 years at the time. My psychiatrist in Edinburgh knew that I was my mum's situation, and I had to bring my mother along the journey. So she had to come along the journey with me, and so I took it very slowly, and it was within the 2 years because I transitioned in the January in 2005, and my mum died on my birthday in that same year.
Oh gosh, that must be so difficult.
But I had to get a second opinion as well, second gender psychiatrist, and it was at that time that the gender identity clinic in Sunderland in the northeast opened again, and I was referred to see a gender psychiatrist over in the northeast who kind of rubber stamped me for surgery. And 2007, I had the surgery in Leicester. Yeah.
And never looked back?
And never looked back. It was fantastic.
There you go. So you've got such an amazing, unique experience to all being a nurse and obviously being a trans woman, a woman. How do you feel that unique insight gives you? Like, so you've been able to see it as both a patient and as a nurse. So do you think, what were your experiences like as a patient, and then what have they been like as a nurse experiencing going through transitioning? Does that make sense?
I know as a patient, when I was actually in hospital, I had both experience of very fantastic care and very negative care. And it was both in private and in NHS.
Yeah.
But where I had the main operation, I had that done in one hospital in Leicester, private hospital, but it's funded by the NHS.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very positive. I'd have a lot of time for the nurses there. They were absolutely very supportive. But then I had to go to another private hospital to get another part of the surgery. And I remember I had to not argue, but I was coming back from the anaesthesia after having the surgery.
Yeah. That
the nurse that was looking after me was not very happy that I was getting funded by the NHS. And she was talking about all the services for cancer patients that weren't getting funded. And I had to defend my situation. And I was just coming back from having anaesthetic. And I think that should never have been. And I did write to the hospital in question, but they kind of covered it up and said it didn't happen, and basically said I was a liar. Or I was suffering from anesthesia.
I think you're perfectly within your reason to say that. Like, it's part of the NMC code that we do not pass any judgment. So,
and all I wanted to do was to raise this issue, was to use it as a learning experience. I wasn't trying to point it out to be criticising of one particular nurse. Anyways, it was a private hospital, and they didn't basically. Anyways, never mind. I went through that, but I've been through the NHS, and I've had both positive and negative experiences.
Mm-hmm.
But I suppose that's with every care, everybody's experience of going into hospital. You can have positive. You might just find a nurse that's very tired and had a really bad week, and you just got to accept that. But it's when they become, when you have to defend yourself. Why I'm getting surgery and others just don't. And I was also outed. There's a breach of confidentiality on a couple of occasions, all for the best reasons.
Yeah.
I mean, somebody came into me and said, "Oh, there's a girl like you who's just had the surgery. Why don't you go and talk to her next door?" And that was a breach of confidentiality. And I just
absolutely.
Luckily, she was quite open and she was quite acceptable, but and that happened even when I was a staff nurse. I was working on the ward, and somebody approached me and said, "Oh, we've got a girl now on ward, just like you. Why don't you go and talk to her?" And
that's so inappropriate.
Absolutely, and that was within the NHS. So it's a learning experience for both people, But all these nurses were doing it in the best interest. They thought they were doing right, They thought trying to help the person, that But what you should have done is maybe ask the patient first, and
Yeah, I think the best way in that situation would be to ask you first how you feel and if you are comfortable with that, rather than just forcing it upon you.
Yeah, but you shouldn't be, you know.
No.
But anyways, I'm a nurse and foremost a nurse, you know.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking about that, how do you feel transitioning and your experience of going through the health system, transitioning, becoming Rachael, how has that affected your professional practice as a nurse? Do you think it has had an impact upon that?
Yeah, I think it's my tolerance.
Mm-hmm.
And you've just got to look behind, you know, there might be other, just because what's happening on the face of it, deep down they might have some other issue that's going on in their lives.
Yeah.
I think just being a bit more tolerant, I hope. I do get a bit stressed out, but I think everybody does at the moment.
Yeah. I think we're all pretty close to the fray at the moment.
Yes.
And what, Rachael, do you, because obviously there's lots of people that won't have a great deal of awareness around trans issues and around how best to support trans patients or trans colleagues. What do you think makes for the best allies? What can people do to best educate themselves? What would your piece as forever the learning rep, what would your best piece of advice be?
You couldn't have a look at that learning resource by the RCN.
So what's your top bullet points from that though?
But if anybody wants, I've already said to people, you know, I'm happy to speak to anybody, or if anybody wants any support where I work, or even within the RCN or students within the RCN, I'm quite happy to talk to people. I'm quite happy to talk to students, student nurses, or just about my journey and about, because it's just because I've had surgery, it doesn't mean that there's still a lot of medical issues still going on, which you need to be aware of, particularly with trans patients, both male and female. I mean, issues like prostate cancer.
No, it was interesting. We were talking about that the other day because a lot of trans women still have a prostate, but don't routinely necessarily get prostate cancer screening.
Yeah.
So there's a massive dearth of evidence around that. So there's many issues like that we all need to be cognizant and aware of. And it's interesting because obviously the new NMC education standards just came in, Rachael. So I was part of my university putting that, implementing those and how we would design the new program. And I've just qualified 2 years ago, and it's all still very much based around white cisgender patients. Whenever you are dealing with case studies, there is hardly any LGBT patients ever. If they are, it's always to do with HIV or sexual health problems. If it's anyone from the LGBT community, I can't remember us ever discussing trans patients, but even people from Black, Asian and minority ethnic backgrounds, patients were never that in our case studies. And there's just, for us to be the most inclusive health professionals we can be, we need to be looking at that intersectionality of society. I know Wendy Irwin, head of inclusion and inequality at the RCN, is a friend of both of ours, and it's intersectionality is what she talks about a lot, and how we aren't one thing, we are the intersection of all our different identities.
And we also need to be aware of catheterization as well, because a lot of nurses will run a mile if they're asked to catheterize a female trans patient.
I hadn't even thought of that, Rachael.
Yeah, but I was always told just to catheterize like you would catheterize on any female patient, and all you've got to be aware of the anatomy slightly different.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you might have to fiddle around with the catheter a bit more.
Well, that just reminds me of a funny story from my district nursing mentor, who was always like, when you catheterize, if it's in the wrong place, you keep it there, and then you've got your other one until you find the right place.
Yeah, but when I was doing my training, males catheterizing female patients just not heard of. It just wasn't done, you know. So
it's funny, it's the other way now. Like I would, if I ever have to catheterize, because I had a long placement in urology, so if I ever have to catheterize a female patient, obviously you would ask the woman if she was comfortable and you would be chaperoned, but quite often you get female nurses not catheterizing male patients, which, considering male nurses are few and far between, that always seems very odd to me.
But even in the days gone by, you didn't need any specialist training to catheterize a female patient.
Yeah.
If you had to catheterize a male patient, you had to, but surely it would have been easier to catheterize a male patient than a female, I would have thought.
Well, I think so. But then there's some horror stories of urology. If you're going in with a catheter and you inflate too early and blow up a prostate, you're in trouble.
Right.
Anyway, Rachel, it's been great to hear from your story, and we're going to jump back to Janan now, and I could rant on forever chatting away with you.
Thank you both so much. That was, especially the catheter part, very illuminating for somebody who's not a nurse, but yeah, worth bearing in mind.